Hello, welcome back to another bite-sized review. Today we'll be taking a look at another Indiana Jones adventure. This is the second entry in this franchise. This is the Temple of Doom. It was released in 1984, and it was rated PG when it came out. There's a whole story about that. And yeah, it's about 2 hours long. We do have Indy back for another adventure. However, this one is very different. Very different compared to the first one, which is Raiders, which I already covered, which is my favorite of the series. And then we have The Last Crusade, which is after this one. And then we have Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is a thing. And so we do have Indy 5 coming out next year, which is going to be really awesome or really terrible. Who knows? But this is the Temple of Doom. This is the one that people always say it's the worst one. Don't watch it. It's awful. It's terrible. Well, I say don't watch Kingdom of the Crystal Skull because that is definitely awful and terrible. In my opinion, the worst indie film is the Crystal Skull. Just stay away from it. But the Temple of Doom, honestly, I have no issues with it. I'm just gonna be honest. I love this film. Of all the indie films, I've seen this one the most. At least I've rewatched it the most. I don't know what it is. The darkness, the adventure, the comedy. I don't know. I just love it. I guess of all the indie films, technically, this one should be my favorite because I've seen it the most. But Raiders is my favorite. Um, so it's interesting. We have Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the straightforward action piece. Then we have The Last Crusade, which is like the father son return to form third movie. And then we have The Kingdom of the Crystal Soul, which is there. So, yeah. And then Temple of Doom is the darkest of the four. Um, which there's a reason for that. You know, obviously George Lucas directed it, and then Steven Spielberg directed it. It's Lucas's idea. So, they're both back. They were both going through a major divorce, which is why it's so incredibly dark. So that's one reason. Another reason is Spielberg wanted to introduce new villains. So we have Indy in India, and he's trying to track down these three objects called the Sankara stones, which give magical life to this village that he ends up at. And so he has to save this village, and he has to kind of get these evil spirits away from them. And so he has to enter a temple which is located in India underneath a palace called Pankha Palace in India. It's like this cool thing with a bunch of history, and yeah, it's interesting. So the villains are not Nazis. They're not Russians. They are this evil cult called the Thuggee, and so it's very dark. I find it very interesting, because it's not the same thing. Like Temple of Doom is obviously not a rehash of Raiders, which most sequels are, like a retread of the first one. Temple of Doom is very different. It has this really cool action scene at the beginning, obviously in Shanghai. There's going to be spoilers, at least minor, I guess. If you haven't seen the Temple of Doom, you should see it at least once. It's a great film, despite how dark it is. Indy's back. He's looking for these stones, played by Harrison Ford once again. He's a little bit different in this film. He's definitely a little more wiser, much more cautious than he was in Raiders, and that's because the Temple of Doom is a prequel to Raiders. So that's why there's no Karen Allen, there's no Paul Freeman, there is no um, there's no Sala. So yeah, that's why a lot of the characters from Raiders are not here, is because it's a prequel. So this is the adventure before Raiders. So yeah, it's very interesting. There's a lot of great scenes. The minecart chase is my favorite scene, of course, in this film. But there's like the fight in the temple. You've got the heart ripping scene where Indy gets brainwashed. There's the car chase in the beginning with Short Round. Um, the opening scene with the poison, with all that, that's great. The bridge scene. Um, there's a lot of great scenes. I particularly like the spike chamber scene and the bug scene. There's so many great scenes. Um, the spoilers for the movie, of course. It's a bit old. Um, Also, interesting thing about the Temple of Doom, the reason why it was rated PG, well, it's technically PG-13, because it created the PG-13 like rating, and so that when this came out, it was so dark that they had to change it to a new rating, and so also when Gremlins came out the same year, they also had to put that as technically PG-13 because it's very dark. It's like funny dark now, but back then it was serious. So yeah, the reason why we had PG-13 and not just PG and R, that's because of this film mostly. There is a lot of darkness. I kind of like that. It's not like super happy all the time, but especially when they get in the temple, it's very dark. Like it's a bit disturbing, but I kind of like that because it separates it from Raiders and Crusade. They're both they're all different, which is nice. It's kind of a unique thing. Um, and I like the new characters are great. Ki Hee Kwan as Short Round is particularly memorable. He's just a great sidekick to Indy. You can tell he looks up to him, and they kind of have this like back and forth dynamic, which is great. And they've had some history. He's kind of like Indy's like a father figure to him, which is nice. You kind of see them bond throughout the film, which is nice. And again, he's very different from Marion in the first film. And then you have the most contentious part, Kate Capshaw as Willie Scott. I really like her. Honestly, I don't have a problem with her. A lot of people do. They say, "Oh, she's the worst part." Well, just look at Crystal Skull, and yeah, that'll erase that from your mind. Um, I really like Kate Capshaw as Willie Scott. I know people don't like her. She's too whiny. She's too bratty. But honestly, if you were a nightclub singer and you were taken out of your element for 3 days in this random jungle with this random adventure and these random evil cult people, you'd probably be spoiled and trying to get your way out of it and trying to swindle everyone and just complain all the time. That's probably what you would do. So, yeah. Another interesting thing is that Steven Spielberg actually married Kate Capshaw after the filming of this film, so they are together. So that's cool. Um, and I think he said that in interviews that that was the only good thing to come out of this. I disagree. I think it's a great film. It's technically not a sequel. It's a prequel, but it came out after Raiders, so it's technically a sequel, but it's a whole thing. I also like the villain. The villain is great. Amish Puri as Molo Ram, the leader of the thuggy cult. He's great. He is very evil and very just diabolical and disgusting, and you want to see him die, and he does die at the very end. You know the scene, eaten by crocodiles. He definitely deserves it. Honestly, I usually have a problem with villains dying, especially in Disney films. Obviously, it's not a Disney film, but just in general, I have a problem with villains dying at the end of films because it limits their potential. Like an example being Obadiah Stane in Iron Man 1. Obviously, he died at the end of the film, spoilers, but he can't come back. Honestly, I think that's the biggest draw with villains is that they can come back and continue to cause trouble. In the indie films, I feel like the villains are so nasty and so evil and so threatening and just really vile that when they die at the end of each film, you care when they die because you want them to die. And so, yeah, Molo Ram, as awesome as he is really epic. He's a really epic villain. Belloc is different. Obviously, you have Donovan in the Last Crusade, and yeah, those are great villains. They all die at the end. Spoilers. They deserve it, especially, I think, of all the indie villains, Mola Ram is the most evil, and he definitely deserves his death. But he's a great villain, and yeah, he's very threatening, and he almost gets the stones, of course, but Indy stops him. I think the music in this is absolutely outstanding, especially for an 80s film. So that's great. The action is fantastic, especially at the end of it. I feel like the ending, like the bridge scene and the mine carts and like the stuff inside the temple, that's all really well done. I think probably the best action scene, I guess my favorite one, other than the minecart chase, is probably the spike chamber where Willie, well, I guess short round activates the spikes, the ceiling spikes, and Indy almost gets killed. That's a great scene, and he does his famous hat roll. That's great. Um, and yeah, I like that this is a prequel. It's a bit different. Indy doesn't wear his leather jacket, not that much. It's mostly a khaki shirt, which is again different from Raiders. He wields a machete. It's just a cool film, in my opinion. I love rewatching this. It's just fun, and it has enough darkness to be serious, but it's also very funny at points, especially with Willie and Indy. They're very different, and they have a good dynamic. I feel like obviously they don't end up together, but I feel like they have a good relationship, and the kiss at the end, I feel like that was earned. Um, I liked it. I like them together, even though they're very different people. Um, I think Willie and Indy are a great couple, despite them being extremely different. Um, I really like this film. I don't have any real issues. Um, I guess the one issue, technically, would be that everyone hates this. I wish more people would like it, at least. But The Temple of Doom, 10 out of 10. I have no problems with it at all. It's a part of the original trilogy, whether you like it or not. Um, so yeah, the darkest, in my opinion, the most fun, and it's just enjoyable. In my opinion, some of the greatest action comes from this film. But what do you think of the Temple of Doom? Do you like it? Do you hate it? I know a lot of you hate it. Um, but let me know what you think. What's your favorite indie film? I'm going to be very surprised if someone says Crystal Skull. Um, we'll get to that one soon. The next one I'll do is, of course, The Last Crusade, which is most everyone's favorite. I can see why. Raiders is my personal favorite, but I love all of these films, the original three. So yeah, that's all I have for you for this one. Um, it's a great film. So yeah, the next one I'll do is The Last Crusade. So look for that very soon, and I will see you for the next one. Let me know what you think. Do you like the indie films or not? Let me know, and I will see you for the next bite-sized review. Thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome day.